Hello and welcome to the Biological Anthropology lecture series. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. Here we explore what it means to be human, biologically, evolutionarily, and behaviorally. Let's begin our journey into the science of humanity. Welcome to Module 8, Australopithecines. In this module, we examine the first stable and unambiguous hominin adaptive grade, exploring how Australopithecines resolved earlier uncertainties and laid the biological foundations for later human evolution. In the previous module, we spent time with early fragmentary candidates, species that hinted at bipedalism and changing dentition, but never quite settled the question. Think about how frustrating that can be as a scientist. Intriguing clues, but no single coherent pattern. Australopithecines are where that uncertainty begins to lift. For the first time in the fossil record, we see a body plan that consistently supports upright walking across multiple skeletal regions, not just in one bone or one specimen. Let's look at why that matters. Once bipedalism becomes habitual and integrated, it reshapes everything, from how energy is used, to how teeth are loaded during chewing, to how bodies interact with different environments. You might wonder whether that means Australopithecines were already human. Not quite. They still had small brains and retained some climbing abilities. But what they achieved was stability. They made bipedalism work, day in and day out, across diverse habitats. As we move through this module, we'll explore how Australopithecines diversified, how different forms adapted to different ecological pressures, and why some evolutionary pathways closed while others eventually led toward Homo. Keep this idea in mind as we begin. Australopithecines are not just a step along the way, they are the moment when the hominin experiment finally found its footing. In this section, we establish the Australopithecine pattern, examining how Australopithecus represents the first clearly stabilized hominin body plan through integrated bipedalism and non-honing chewing. Let's revisit where Ardipithecus leaves us. In the fossil record, Ardipithecus represents a crucial but still unsettled stage in early hominin evolution. Its anatomy tells us that upright walking had begun to emerge, but it also reminds us that climbing and life in the trees were still central to daily survival. You might remember how often we described Ardipithecus as mosaic, partly bipedal, partly arboreal, and not yet committed to one way of moving through the world. That tension is exactly what makes the transition to Australopithecus so informative. When we move from Ardipithecus to Australopithecus, we are not just seeing a new species name appear in the fossil record, we are seeing a shift in how anatomy is organized. Let's look at posture and locomotion first. In Ardipithecus, bipedal traits coexist with an opposable big toe and limb proportions well suited for climbing. By the time we reach early Australopithecines, the lower limb anatomy tells a more unified story. The pelvis is reshaped to support an upright trunk, the femur angles inward to stabilize single-leg stance, and the foot is structured for push-off rather than grasping. Think of it as the difference between occasionally using a tool and redesigning your whole workflow around it. Bipedalism becomes the default, not an option. Chewing anatomy follows a similar pattern. Ardipithecus already shows reduced canine size and a weakening of the honing complex, but these traits are not yet fully standardized. In Australopithecines, reduced canines and non-honing chewing appear consistently across individuals and species. You might wonder why this matters so much. Teeth respond directly to diet and behavior, and when dental traits stabilize, they signal long-term adaptation rather than short-term flexibility. This suggests that Australopithecines were exploiting a broader and more reliable range of foods, supporting their success across varied environments. Let's also think about habitat. Ardipithecus lived in woodland settings, challenging older ideas that bipedalism evolved only in open savannas. Australopithecines continue to occupy mosaic environments, but their anatomy shows they were better equipped for regular terrestrial movement within those landscapes. Upright walking now fits seamlessly into daily life, rather than being just one of several locomotor strategies. So what does this transition really represent? It's the moment when early experimentation gives way to stabilization. Ardipithecus shows us how bipedalism could begin. Australopithecus shows us how it could work. As we move forward, keep this transition in mind. It explains why Australopithecines are recognized as the first clearly established hominins, and why they form the foundation from which later human evolution unfolds. Let's revisit what we mean when we say bipedalism. It's tempting to think of it as a single trait, walking on two legs, but that can be misleading. Upright walking only works when the entire skeleton is organized to support it. What sets Australopithecines apart from earlier hominins is not that they walked upright occasionally, but that their bodies were structurally built to do so on a regular basis. Let's look at the skeleton as a system rather than a collection of parts. Start with the pelvis. In Australopithecines, the pelvis is shorter and broader than in apes, bringing the hip joints closer to the center of gravity. This helps stabilize the trunk when standing on one leg during walking. Think about how often that happens in a normal stride. Every step involves a moment of balance. Without this pelvic reorganization, habitual bipedalism would be unstable and inefficient. Now, move down to the femur. The thigh bone in Australopithecines angles inward from the hip toward the knee, a feature that positions the knees under the body's center of mass. You might wonder why that matters. If the legs stayed straight down from the hips, like in many apes, each step would cause the body to sway side to side. The angled femur reduces that wobble, making walking smoother and less energetically costly. The knee itself reinforces this pattern. Its structure supports full extension during upright stance, allowing the leg to lock and bear weight efficiently. This means an Australopithecine could stand upright for extended periods without constant muscular effort, something quadrupedal apes are not built to do. Let's look at the spine next. Australopithecines show a curvature in the lower back that helps keep the upper body balanced over the hips. This lumbar curve acts like a shock absorber and positioning system at the same time. Without it, the torso would tip forward during upright walking. Again, this isn't a single adaptation. It's part of a coordinated design. Now consider the foot. Earlier hominins, like Ardipithecus, retained an opposable big toe for grasping. In Australopithecines, the big toe is aligned with the other toes, forming a rigid lever for push-off during walking. The foot is no longer primarily a grasping tool, it's a propulsive platform. You might recognize this shift in the fossil footprints at Laetoli, which show a clear heel strike and toe-off pattern remarkably similar to modern human walking. So when we talk about skeletal integration, we're talking about all these elements working together. Pelvis, femur, knee, spine, and foot are aligned toward the same function. Think about this as a machine designed for a specific task. Changing one component helps, but redesigning the entire system changes what the machine can do. That's why Australopithecine bipedalism is considered unambiguous. It's not inferred from a single bone or feature. It's written across the skeleton. And once that system is in place, it shapes everything that follows in hominin evolution, from energy use to habitat choice to the evolutionary possibilities that eventually lead to our own genus. Let's revisit why teeth matter so much in the study of early hominins. Bones can tell us how an organism moved, but teeth often tell us how it lived. They preserve exceptionally well, they interact directly with food, and they reflect long-term behavioral patterns. When we talk about dentition in Australopithecines, we're not just describing tooth size or shape, we're identifying a fundamental shift away from the ancestral ape condition. Let's look at the key contrast. In many apes, the canines are large, projecting, and function as part of a honing complex, where the upper canine sharpens against the lower premolar. This system is closely tied to social signaling, dominance displays, and competition, particularly among males. In Australopithecines, that system is gone. The canines are reduced and the honing mechanism disappears. You might wonder why such a seemingly small change matters. It matters because it signals a long-term reorganization of both feeding behavior and social dynamics. Chewing mechanics change as well. Australopithecine teeth show broader premolars and molars with thicker enamel, features well suited for processing a wide range of foods. Rather than slicing or puncturing, these teeth are adapted for grinding and crushing. Think about the difference between cutting something with a knife and breaking it down with a mortar and pestle. The latter requires repeated, forceful chewing, and that's exactly what Australopithecine dentition supports. Now consider consistency. Reduced canines and non-honing chewing appear repeatedly across different Australopithecine species and individuals. This isn't a one-off adaptation or a localized experiment. It's a stable pattern, which tells us these traits were being strongly favored by natural selection. You might wonder what kinds of foods drove this change. The fossil evidence suggests dietary flexibility, foods that were tougher, more abrasive, or seasonally variable, rather than a narrow specialization. There's also an important behavioral implication here. Smaller canines and reduced sexual dimorphism suggest a shift away from intense male-male competition. While we have to be cautious about reconstructing social behavior from teeth alone, the pattern is consistent with changes in mating systems and reduced reliance on aggression as a primary social strategy. Again, this doesn't mean Australopithecines were peaceful, but it does suggest a different balance of social pressures compared to many apes. Let's step back and put this into evolutionary context. Dentition doesn't evolve in isolation. Changes in chewing anatomy interact with changes in posture, locomotion, and ecology. As Australopithecines became committed bipeds, their hands were freed from locomotion, and their feeding strategies could diversify. Teeth that could handle a wide range of foods would have been a major advantage in unpredictable environments. So when we talk about non-honing chewing in Australopithecines, we're really talking about stability. These dental traits tell us that Australopithecines weren't just experimenting with new ways of feeding, they had settled into a successful adaptive strategy. Alongside integrated bipedalism, this chewing system helps define the Australopithecine pattern and explains why this group represents the first clearly established hominin adaptive grade. First, let's revisit what we've established in this section. We began by asking a simple but powerful question. What does a hominin look like once the evolutionary experiment actually works? Through Australopithecines, we finally see an answer that holds together. Upright walking is no longer hinted at or inferred from a single feature. It's supported by a coordinated skeletal system. Chewing is no longer shaped by sharpening canines or social display. It's built for consistent, forceful processing of food. Together, these traits form a pattern that repeats across individuals and species. Now, this part is important. What makes Australopithecines stand out is not that they are advanced in every sense. Their brains are still small, and some arboreal abilities remain, but evolution isn't about becoming modern all at once. It's about solving key problems well enough to persist. Australopithecines solved the problem of locomotion by committing fully to bipedalism, and they solved the problem of feeding by adopting a stable, non-honing chewing system that works across changing environments. Think about why this matters for everything that comes next. Once a body plan stabilizes, it becomes a platform for further change. You can't meaningfully expand brain size, alter life history, or experiment with new behaviors unless the basics, how you move and how you eat, are reliable. Australopithecines provide that reliability. So as we close this section, keep this idea in mind. Australopithecines are not just another group of early fossils. They represent the moment when the hominin body plan settles into a form that works consistently. That stability is what allows diversity, specialization, and eventually new evolutionary pathways to unfold, topics we'll turn to in the next section. Thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tudurin. I hope this session deepened your understanding of biological anthropology. Keep exploring what it means to be human. See you soon.